Okay, I got my photo gear and I got my ladder. We're ready to go. Not exactly sure what kind of conditions we got. It's a little bit overcast and cloudy. Hoping there's gonna be a break for a little sunrise. Let's go find out. It's one of those mornings you can't decide. Do I stay in bed or do I get up and photograph? Today I decided I'm gonna get up and at least go look. There is some cloud cover. It's we're in the week of Thanksgiving, so Thanksgiving is just a couple days away. It's still fairly mild out right now, and we're expecting cold, rainy weather in Thanksgiving. I've got a lot of family things coming up, so I know I won't be photographing then. So I'm going to take a chance, see if we can just get a little crack on the horizon, and maybe we'll get a beautiful sunrise. If not, I'm going to get up, head out, and just enjoy a little piece. Got my camera equipment, and I've got my ladder. One of the issues with photographing in the low country, which is coastal Georgia and South Carolina, is it's low. There isn't much vantage point, and some of the most spectacular views are on the marsh, but it's hard to really get a good perspective of what that looks like when you're standing at marsh level. So I've got a ladder and I've got a platform on the top of my car, so I may, if I get a good view, climb up on the top of my car and set up. Alright, let's take a ride. Alright, we're coming up on the causeway for Burnside Island. And Burnside Island is what I would consider to be an interior barrier island for coastal Georgia. The two outer islands are Wausau and Ossabaw Islands. And then inside those two, just separated by a tidal river, is Skidaway River. And then you've got Skidaway Island. And then inside of Skidaway Island is Burnside Island, which is the island we're on right now. So, pre-sunset, there are clouds there on the horizon. Gonna probably snuff out the sunset or the sunrise, because I'm gonna be looking the other way, the scene I'm actually gonna photograph this morning. So I may have chosen the wrong place to come, but we'll find out here in a minute. Alright, we're on the car. Let's get our gear set up. Alright, well, the sun has long since come up, and like I was afraid, you can't really see it, just looks gray, but the sun is right behind the clouds. I'm really hoping for some strong side light to light this scene of the marsh, and also to light the bottoms of those clouds that we have. But that was not to be this morning. But I'm glad I got up. This is actually the first time I've ever tried my car top platform, and I will have to say I don't think it's going to work the way I've got it configured. It's a little spongy. It's of like being on a diving board. So I'm gonna have to stiffen up, put some struts underneath it to some beams to stiffen that up just a little bit, because every time I take a long exposure I've got to be real still, and I can't really be still quite enough. I'm afraid the pictures I did take just as a test are going to be a little soft from camera shake. So but you know, that's what you do. You try some things work, which is rare, but it doesn't hurt to keep trying. Keeps me interested in what I'm doing. So I'm gonna wait a little bit longer and just hope that sun breaks a little bit. Even if it's a little higher than I want, I'm gonna sit it out for a little bit. So let's see what we get. Okay, well, it's 8 o'clock, so we're an hour past sunrise, and the sun peeked out a little bit, but I never really got any color, but hopefully I got a little more contrast in the shots I took. I did make a couple mistakes early. One is I left my cup of coffee down in the car, and the other mistake I made is when I originally set up, I envisioned this as being a shot using a 70 millimeter with my 70 to 200, and the 70 was just too much. Even though I'm doing a panoramic, it was just too much. I couldn't get any foreground down here, so I went to the 50 and did several panoramics. Just threw it on there hoping not to miss any sunshine, which I didn't. But the one thing I didn't do to start with was put my nodal rail on, which I normally feel like I need to use with a 50 millimeter. With the 70 to 200, right where the lens collar is, that generally is perfect for stitching together. So I've got some photographs without the nodal rail and some with on the 50 millimeter. So when I get back to my office, I'll stitch those together, and I'll be able to tell how much of a difference it made. So anyhow, still beautiful out here, getting a little nippy. Wish I had my coffee with me, and we'll see. So let me switch this camera around so you can kind of see what I'm seeing in terms of what's in the foreground. Let me do that right now. Okay, so here is the wide angle view of what's right below me. Car somewhere over there's the ladder. It's straight up and down. That is the view I've got, and I'm doing that with a instead of a wide angle, which gives it some interesting perspective. I'm doing it with a 50 to try and get some more detail out of this scene. It is a little there isn't much in the background, and that's why you really, for this shot, I really wanted a beautiful sunrise with some color, but I'll come back again. So let's head back and we'll process those images. All right, I got my cup of coffee finally. I'm warming up. I got my photos loaded. Before we look at those photos, I want to talk to you a little bit about something I mentioned when I was out photographing this morning. And that is the use of wide angle lens. Why did I choose to use a longer lens when I could have used a wide angle lens and taken one photograph? It would have been way simpler than leveling my tripod and taking several slices to get a panoramic. And the reason I do that is for perspective. A wide angle lens I typically think about using when the foreground subject is a very strong visual element. That's going to be the focal point of my photograph, or that a foreground object helps frame up or leads your eye into the main focal point of the image. In the photograph I was doing today, that was not the case. I just didn't think that would be appropriate. I really kind of prefer to, when I do a wide angle panoramic, I'm usually doing it to gain what I would consider a normal perspective. And that is that For example, when you use a normal lens, which is a 50 to 100 millimeter, I think of those as being normal in that the depth perspective that you get, the relationship between foreground objects and background objects appear to be basically normal to what we see with our eyes. However, 50 to 100 doesn't take in the field of view that our eye sees. So if I use a longer lens and then do several vertical images to get a panoramic, I get kind of a normal perspective of what I'm seeing when I'm out there in nature. So that's why I use that. And then again, the other lenses that we haven't talked about are the telephoto range, which for me it's 135 and beyond. I use 200 and even 300 fairly frequently in doing panoramics. And obviously those longer lenses, what they do is the opposite of a wide angle. They take background objects and pull them in a little bit closer, or people will often say they compress the image. So if you want objects in the background to have more dominance in your image, you might use a telephoto to pull those in. And I use a 300. If I have open expanse, I'll use a 300 very often to do a panoramic with. And probably in a couple of weeks I'm going to be going somewhere, and I'll be able to show you how that works. So, but for now, let's take a look at the images we took this morning and see what we learned. All right, so here are some of the images that I took. But here's 6 of them at the darker setting. This is more of the sky setting. And it's fairly close. I could probably don't even need to blend these. This is with the 50 millimeter lens, the Zeiss 1.4. I'm using this at f/16 because I want that grass in the foreground to be sharp along with the whole scene. So we have 6 images here, and each image overlaps the other by 1/3. And I find that if I overlap for a panoramic, if I do a 1/3 overlap, it's going to stitch together very nicely. Sometimes if you get distracted and you get less than 20% overlap, Photoshop may not stitch them together. I've had that issue, and I do want Photoshop to be able to do it. Once I'm done stitching this together in Photoshop, Photoshop will create a DNG file for me of my stitched image. And that DNG file I can open up again in Camera Raw or Lightroom, and I can use all those adjustment tools on this final stitched image, just as if you were working on a raw file. So I find that to be very helpful. Okay, so one of the issues that I talked about this morning was the fact that I didn't use a nodal rail when I first started this morning photographing this scene. But I was concerned that I may had some problems stitching that together with my 50 millimeter lens. It's something I don't have to worry about with my 70 to 200 because the lens collar puts that lens roughly at the nodal point of that setup. So I don't even have to think about it when I put that lens on. But at 50, I was a little bit concerned. And so let's bring up 2 stitched together images, one using the nodal rail and one without. So which one stitched together better? Which one's more precise? I left it uncropped so you can see the actual stitch marks. This is exactly how it came out after Photoshop got done stitching it together. Yeah, I can't tell either. So as it turns out, with this scene and that lens, that was not an issue. I didn't have to break out the nodal rail. Now, had there been, say, a tree or a branch or some object that was in the foreground that was extending out into the image, closer to the camera than anything else in the image, there could have been an issue with that. So I'm not saying you don't need one, but with this kind of scene where you don't have any distinct object near the lens, didn't need it. As it turns out, that was not an issue. The other thing that I mentioned that I was concerned about this morning was the fact that that platform was a little springy, and I was afraid I was going to get some image shake. My slowest shutter speed, I think, was about a sixth of a second, and turned out fine. And so let's just open up one of these images, and I would say that, you know, what I have in mind when I go out there is that bend in the river and that dock, and then whatever else might be out there, like, and I'm hoping for a beautiful sky. So keep going back there until I get that combination of light and tide and strong visual content that really makes this scene dramatic. Well, I can't think of a lot more to say about that image. Again, it's not the one I'd hoped to get, but I learned some things that are going to be very helpful in my future. So when I get into situations where I have the opportunity to get that great photograph, there are going to be some principles that I learned this morning that I can apply to that setting, and it's going to help me ensure that I can take advantage of the opportunities I have. I hope this was helpful for you. Let me know what things you're interested in hearing about. I'm looking forward to your feedback, and thank you for joining me on Seeing the Light. Get out there, see the light, and I'll see you next time. Thank you. Bye-bye. Oh, shoot.